You've landed on The Substance, a podcast aimed at being biblical, thoughtful, and human. Join us each week as we engage the culture without the culture war. I'm your host, Philip Marinello, joined by my good friends and co-hosts tonight, Trevor Aiken.
Hey, everybody.
And Vincent Edwards.
Yo, yo.
You can leave it in, Trev. I got to stop saying tonight because that's the great thing about podcasts. People can literally listen whenever. If you all are joining us here, The Substance is a Christian variety show. Each week we talk for about an hour, especially when it's not about a movie, about something or some things related to Christianity, culture, and the arts. Sometimes we have great guests like Karen Swallow-Prior, Barnabas Piper, Justin Gibney, Robert P. Jones, Keena Aragon, and other times we just chop it up amongst ourselves. And then at the end, us or our guests will be sharing some shout-outs of things we've been finding enjoyable or edifying recently. So this today,
Yes.
let me run that back here. So this evening. So today we have esteemed author of many, many books and current Vice President of Research and Resource Development over at the NAM SBC. That's the North American Mission Board.
Indeed.
Boom. We got Trevin Wax. Welcome.
Hey, guys. Good to be with you guys.
Thanks for joining. And podcast marathoner today, huh?
Yeah, I normally don't have two in one day, but this is one of the two, and kind of talking on some of the same subjects. So you guys are going to have to beat the podcast that I did earlier today.
Hopefully the better one of the two. Well,
wow.
That's a challenge.
We're up for it.
I'm more of a cooperative type, so I just want us all to win.
Everyone gets a sticker, right? Everyone gets a.
We
Everyone
actually
gets a
have
trophy.
we have
participation trophies. We did a show
trophies,
on that, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, it's easy. You win.
Exactly. Oh, awesome. Thanks.
But you know that line from The Incredibles of,
when everyone's
Daddy, if
special.
everyone is special, no one's special. I mean,
Yeah.
That's got to be there somewhere in your mind.
Well, I don't know. And made in the image of God seems pretty special to me.
Oh, theology too. Off the bat. Wow. Okay.
That's not bad.
Okay, I can't beat that. Moving on.
Man, I'm excited to have you with us here. So much already, like just looking at this book that you've recently put out, and really it's kind of footnotes, annotations, introductions to a Christian classic, G.K. Chesterton's Orthodoxy.
Yeah, it's also put out by
yeah.
B&H, not terribly different than the Karen Swallow-Prior Reading and Reflections, except this is theology and Christian thought instead of fiction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is it's not part of the same series because she's obviously doing literature, but I think we share. I know I share with Karen the same heart, is to get people reading great books,
Mm-hmm.
and to somehow ease the path into those books as much as possible. And this is a book I love, and I want more people to read it. And I realize it's hard. It's a hard book to read. So this is that was really the heart behind putting some effort into making it a little more accessible without changing it.
So let me say, you have at least one success. B&H sent us a copy, and I was going through this and your notes and listening to the audiobook some as well. I'm in my 30s. I cannot believe, I wasn't even intimidated by it. I don't know why I hadn't read it. I think early on in my life, in maybe some very conservative fundamental circles, Chesterton was a little suspect. But I don't know why I haven't read this in the last 5 to 10 years. So thank you for making me read it. It was, I love it.
Yeah. I'm glad.
I was surprised by it as well. I'd love to hear, as we're kind of getting started off, where your journey with this work started.
Yeah, I mean, at some point, I'm sure I just came across Chesterton quotes as a kid, a teenager, young adult. I mean, he's so quotable. Church. Yeah, I mean, he's quotable all over the place, and even secular people quote him. I mean, he's quoted in Supreme Court decisions. He's he's eminently quotable. Got great analogies, very witty, funny lines. So I'm sure that's kind of where I knew of him. But really, the journey for me with Chesterton starts with C.S. Lewis. Lewis was deeply influenced by Chesterton. I think it was the time he was either convalescing with trench fever or after he had been injured in World War I, in which he was given a book of Chesterton essays. And he talks about in his autobiography, Surprised by Joy, how Chesterton made a conquest of him, and he wasn't sure why at first. But something about the joy of life in the work itself, and the way that the humor doesn't come from something cheap, but is actually seeing something glorious at the heart of humanity, at the heart of existence, that captured Lewis and was, Chesterton was influential in his journey toward faith. And so, like a lot of evangelicals, a lot of Christians have been influenced by Lewis. I certainly have been.
Sure.
But Lewis pointed me back to Chesterton. And so back in, I guess it was 2010, I picked up Orthodoxy and thought, well, this is a classic. I need to read it. And that was my first this was the book that introduced me to his work. And there's a lot of it.
Yeah.
He wrote a lot and a lot of different genres.
I think one of the things that's surprising too about this work is when you hear Orthodoxy and you think G.K. Chesterton, like, I don't know, but for whatever reason in my mind, I'm thinking of almost like, like Calvin in his institutes, and coming kind of having revised it and done all this work on it, like that it's some sort of tome of Christian theology that was produced by a man in his middle to later years of life, and really is not the picture at all of this work.
No, that's like that description is like almost the opposite of what I would call this work, which is so funny to think of that. And this guy's in his 30s when he's writing it.
Right.
But it is nothing like this big tome of theology. He calls it a slovenly autobiography. It's a journey it's like his journey toward Christianity. And he does it not by telling you his story so much as by giving you this series of mental pictures.
Yeah.
And it's the images that really stand out and shine. And that's what makes the book really different and just really engaging, I think.
I had this thought, and then I'll kick it over to the other guys after I make this comment. But I had this thought that, like, people don't write books like this anymore. It feels like a weird thing to say.
They don't catch on. Maybe they do. Maybe there's really great books in little niche bits of academia, but I've never come across
the reason why I think that they don't, though, is because there's other ways to express this kind of thought now. You can self-publish on social media, or you can get into a blog war with someone. Like, this is spurred on by this newspaper article, right? This guy, like, I'm gonna write to this.
To talk to this other guy who's challenging me. I did like that aspect.
Yeah, so I wonder if there's a unique aspect about this because of the time in which people are writing and are free to write kind of in this way. It feels casual.
That's really interesting. So Chesterton was a journalist before he was anything else, and so he's writing a lot of articles for newspapers, and I mean did for decades. And what's interesting is that he was sort of, for lack of a better term, blogging before blogging was a thing, right? Because he was writing these articles and he was putting them out there, and he was engaging with people and having debates with people, and he, he's doing literary criticism on the one hand, he's doing all sorts of stuff. But this is it's kind of classic Chesterton to start writing a book by saying, I'm going to answer this challenge that's come to me from a reader from a previous book. And just be like, okay, that's the answer. I'm going to go home and write a book and answer to this question. And he's like, and this is the book I have written.
Here's 200 pages.
Yes.
And he says, nothing could induce me to read it. That's the other funny thing.
I thought that was funny as well.
Yeah. Now, so when I think of the word orthodoxy, somebody might hear that and think, this is going to be dense. This is going to be heady. I'm intimidated just by the title. So what would be like your marketing pitch for somebody who's like, I might try to read it, but I don't know, I just feel a little overwhelmed just even by the title? How would you kind of bring that person in and say, yo, there's value here?
Yeah, I would answer that and say, it is going to be dense and it is going to be heady, but not in the way you think. That's the surprise of this book.
Yeah.
Like when you think of orthodoxy, you think of really intricate, dense theology.
Think like institutes, like
Yes,
because
like
in
the
my mind it
tone.
was kind of with that. Like it was on the shelf of like the classics with like like institutes or City of God or Confessions or things like that. And I was just like, it's this big, and I was like, oh, also side note, really gorgeous edition, by the way.
Oh, thank you very
Usually
much.
IVP are the studs, but this is. Did you have a hand in designing this cover?
I mean, I'm not the designer, but we had several different options to choose from, and I just love this one. And I've got a copy of an original Orthodoxy American edition, and I loved the way that they even mimicked to some extent
the gold.
And the gold kind of foil feel, and the font is similar, so
nice.
I thought they did just an excellent job giving you a feel. The inside feels a little more contemporary, but there's this classic feel to it. So
signature on the back is a nice touch.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a real nice touch.
Excellent.
Yeah. So, this is not that deep book of theology that you might think, like the Institutes or one of those classics in that sense. It's more of a work of apologetics almost, in explaining this is how someone came to faith. And ironically, it's him explaining how one of the things that drove him to the Christian faith was reading all of the anti-Christians that he had been reading. So he's reading all of these people that are hostile to the Christian faith or that are critiquing the Christian faith, and it actually leads him to Christianity. So this is the reason it's called Orthodoxy instead of anything else is because he wrote a book before this called Heretics. And the book Heretics is not really about Christian heretics in the classic sense. It's not like, the famous heretic Arius over against Athanasius, like those classic battles of heresy and orthodoxy. Yeah. But he's writing about the people in his time. And that's who he's writing about in Heretics. And so the challenge that came to him was, okay, fine, Chesterton's told us what's wrong with all of what we think. We want to know, what does Chesterton think? Like, what's his philosophy of life? What does he really believe? And that's the challenge that led him to write a book with these mental images that sort of leads you to this painting almost of what brought about Christianity and what it seemed to be common sense to him.
Wow, that's awesome. I think about that, and then I'm like, I wonder if anybody, now obviously the Holy Spirit, he can do whatever he wants, but it's like to listen and kind of dive into the opposing thoughts or the hostile voices against Christianity. I wonder if someone pursued that now, would they still come away with like, I'm listening to this, I'm kind of digesting it, and then I'm coming away with a different conclusion? Or it's presented in such a way now that it's like magnetic and it's like, oh man, maybe I should just abandon my faith. How do you think a person might process something like Chesterton's environment today?
Yeah, that's it's hard to say. The way that people talk about Christianity today is different than the way it was 100 years ago. A lot of the people who were opposing Christianity 100 years ago were they were opposed to the miracles, but they liked the morality. They wanted sort of the fatherhood of God, the brotherhood of man. Can you just take the miracles out, all the supernatural stuff, and basically let us live in a naturalistic kind of world, but let us keep some good morals,
like a Jefferson Bible.
Yeah, like just it's suited for the modern person, right?
Sure.
Like that was the way it was 100 years ago. I think things have changed today. Today, more if 100 years ago people wanted Christian morality without the miracles, I think today people want Christian miracles without the morality. So it's almost flipped the other way. Like, what's the moral vision at the heart of Christianity is what is under fire in a lot of things. And I think what Chesterton wants to say from 100 years ago is, you don't get the morality without the miracles. Like you can't sort of shed this stuff that you think is just superstitious and then keep this kernel. It all hangs together. And the way it hangs together is like, it's like a key fitting a lock, And so, Chesterton didn't read the people that were against Christianity because he was trying to disprove them. He wasn't a Christian at the time. He read them and believed a lot of what they said, and it led to despair. And he winds up, in fact, in the 1890s, about 10, 15 years before this book comes out, he winds up in a terrible, dark place, very dark place of just complete despair because of what, the philosophies he's been taking in. But then he emerges from that with one thought that he starts to build a whole principle of life on, is that it is better to exist than to not exist. Existence is better than non-existence. And from that one thing of existence, on that he builds this idea of gratitude for existence. And then there's that whole idea of, well, you'd have to be grateful to someone. And then
who's the object of that? Yeah.
That's right. That's right. And so that's really what brings him out of the pit and then begins this journey that eventually leads to Christianity.
Man, shout out to apologetics. Shout out. That's my jam.
Vince, you will love this book when you read it. Or audiobook is also great. There's a couple. I think Christian Audio has a really good one that's free on all the streaming, the library 100%. Platforms.
Yeah. I'm extremely excited.
I'm barely into it, and it's already got me thinking in a lot of different ways. Like it's very helpful to spur thought. And I was even taking just that thought you were talking about, it's better to exist than not to exist, into God's response to the fall. I was listening through on Windows and Mirrors podcast. Shout out to those guys. And they were talking about God could have responded to sin in the garden with just annihilating and starting over, but he was gracious to them, and allowed them to exist. And it wasn't, existence was what he chose over non-existence in that moment. Redemption is what he chose, so it's almost if you take the idea of sin and the problem of evil and things like that, and think about it, and then think about God's response to it. It was because he chose to redeem that rather than annihilate. He chose to redeem rather than to cause non-existence. Why there's evil that is being redeemed in the world still, in that sense. So there's a lot in that thought. There's a lot there.
There's Trevin, there's one particular there's a lot, and I did a lot of listening, and I'm going back and I'm underlining and reading your notes. Again, side note, I think this is a great resource, just the way it's formatted for book groups. So I'm going to get with the B&H people. Will probably have 2 giveaway copies, but even if you win a giveaway copy, buy a couple more, get some friends together. This is a great small group book club type book. But before I get to one of the primary ones that stuck out with me, the times you've read this over the years, whether it was the first time or I don't know, how many times have you read the book, do you think?
I was just trying to estimate that today. I think it's been at least 10, but over the years, but the first time I read it, I really did not get a lot of what was going on, just to be quite honest. This is a tough book. And I don't want to tell people that it's super, super easy, because I want them to feel the sense of accomplishment when they get to the end of it. Man, I read a really hard book that was really good in a lot of ways, stretched me, it's like a workout for the mind, for sure.
It is.
The first time I read it, I thought, this is amazing, and I don't understand half of it, but it is amazing. That's how it felt. It's almost like I'm in a dense jungle, and there's high grass all around me, and I'm finding gold everywhere. I just got to keep searching. That's how the book felt to me, like a jungle with gold that I could find. And so I tell people, this is not it's not a really easy book. There's some things that make it. Honestly, I think I've made it a little bit easier in just the fact that I'm annotating. I'm giving you some guidance, because a lot of the people he's talking about, or the places he's talking about in England, or historical events that happened in the 1700s occasionally, he's just using these little random things. And we don't know what the heck he's talking about. We're not as educated as he was, and we don't live in the same, country that he lived in and all that. So some of what I'm doing in the footnotes is just to say, hey, this is who he's talking about, or this is who this person is. You can get a bit of an education just from kind of getting acquainted with the people, the voices that he's talking to. But make no mistake, it's going to demand something of you. It's the kind of book that you may want to, read a second time after you've read it once, but it is rewarding. It is so rewarding.
I wanted to ask you about. Go ahead, Phil.
Because in your times reading it, what are, favorite maybe is kind of a trite question, but like, what do you think are, like, what do you think of when you think of orthodoxy? What are the ideas or the principles or the examples? Like, what's your biggest takeaway when you think about the book?
I think two chapters immediately come to mind, and two major emphases of the book. The first chapter is called the first chapter that comes to mind, it's like the fourth in the book, is called The Ethics of Elfland. And
for sure.
It's a chapter about fairy tales and about the laws that are in fairy tales and how these stories work and how they go. And basically, Chesterton is saying that there's a sense of wonder and gratitude at existence and at the way things are that is beautiful. That chapter is foundational. And then the other chapter that really sticks out to me is The Paradoxes of Christianity, which talks about these beautiful paradoxes at the heart of the Christian faith, what actually constitutes Orthodox teaching and why they matter so much, and how Christianity has kind of bobbed and weaved and dodged heresy coming from all directions by being broad and by holding on to them in their fiery fullness. There's one passage, if I had to pick a favorite passage in the book, in the Ethics of Elfland chapter, this is a passage that virtually every time I've read Chesterton moves me. It has moved me to tears on multiple occasions. It's Chesterton's answering this idea that nature is just mechanical and lifeless and repetitive. And because the people in his time were basically the scientists, a lot of the scientific people were saying, you can't really believe in like a creation or a creator or whatnot. Look, everything works like clockwork. Doesn't that just show you that everything is just natural laws and that there's no outside force and whatnot? And Chesterton makes this brings this stunning image to bear in the chapter. He says, why do we necessarily assume that repetition is a sign of death? What if repetition is a sign of life? And he uses the example of a child in order to make the case. He talks about how, and if you've got kids, you know what this is like.
I was listening to this passage. I'm going to let you have the punchline here. I was listening to this passage the other day, actually, literally yesterday. I took my wife and my two kids to go to Texas from Kansas City to visit Trevor and his two kids. So this was like after watching four little kids play together and doing this exact thing for several days in a row. So this really hit me as I was listening to this yesterday.
Well, if you've read your kid a bedtime story, you know that, especially if it's a story they love, they're ready to hear the same story the next night. The same book.
Their favorite word is again.
Yes. Good night, moon. I think I've got memorized. Okay.
Yeah.
But they get better as they get older, obviously. But also just like a kid is always telling you, how you throw a kid up in the air and then they get that exhilarating rush. And what do they say? They say, do it again, do it again. And so basically Chesterton says, a child kicks his legs rhythmically through excess, not absence of life. Because children have abounding vitality, because they are in spirit fierce and free, therefore they want things repeated and unchanged. They always say, do it again. And the grown-up person does it again until he is nearly dead.
Facts.
Then he says, for grown-up people are not strong enough to exult in monotony. But perhaps God is strong enough to exult in monotony. And this is the killer. Here he says, it is possible that God says every morning, do it again to the sun, and every evening, do it again to the moon. It may not be automatic necessity that makes all daisies alike. It may be that God makes every daisy separately, but has never got tired of making them. it may be that he has the eternal appetite of infancy, for we have sinned and grown old, and our Father is younger than we. That line, I'm just like, every time I see the sun, a sunset or the sun, like when the sun is going down, I'm like, in the morning, God's going to say, do it again. Do it again. You know, like it's just so rich and beautiful to see nature in that way, that this is an encore of God's glory, you know.
That's a great sampling too of the kind of like mind-bending work that you're talking about. It has to go on when you read the work, like to think about, because the standard picture of God is this old man with the big old white beard and stuff, and our Father is younger than we, and then just like chew on that one for a second, that the eternal God in a some sense is younger than you. Like, what does that mean? You know, how can that be true?
You have to ponder that for quite a bit, just like sit in silence and just think.
You know, Rich Mullins was very influenced by this book, the Christian singer, and he wrote a song called "Growing Young" that is inspired by that passage. And so, yeah, I mean, there's artistry that in the book, and then there's artistry that comes out of the book. Andrew Peterson, "Don't You Want to Thank Someone," you know, is based on that line, I think, from Chesterton, where he says, the roughest part for the atheist is when they really feel grateful and have no one to thank. You know, like they really feel thankful but have no one to thank, and like that sort of gratitude for existence, but then it can't go anywhere because you don't believe that you've got a creator. You know.
Yeah, I love reading or watching or listening to an artist. In this case, a wordsmith who has a high degree of wonder. I'm really just treasuring this book, and also a little bit irritated that I didn't read this 10 years ago. But I'm glad. Thank you for making me picking it up now.
Yeah. Hey, I'm glad you enjoyed it. I want to get more people into it.
One of the things that stuck out to me, I forget which chapter. I don't think it was actually in his initial treatment of like the maniac, but I think he was referring back to it. It ties to something that we talk about on the show a lot, and it isn't just dunking on hyper conservatives, but just trying to be like thoughtful and open to the vastness of God's world. I forget exactly how it goes, but it was talking about how like strict. He was talking about logicians, but I also think of like people who hold their systematic theology more tightly than they maybe do their faith in the person of God. Like it was something like the artist is happy to get his mind into the heavens, but the logician tries to cram the heavens into his mind, and his mind breaks.
Yes,
like, talk to us about that that concept and kind of how we see that in our modern age.
Yeah, so you got to remember Chesterton's main foe is at that part of the book are these people that at the time they were the free thinkers. They called themselves the free thinkers, but he said they're actually not free to think because what they've closed themselves into the prison of one idea, he says. And it's the idea that everything is material. There's nothing beyond the material world. And so Chesterton says basically this is the you can be in the well-lit prison of one idea and can if you go to an asylum where there are people who would be considered clinically insane, well, you find that they are often extraordinarily logical, but the logic is in a tight circle and it can't break out. Like, I mean, if someone thinks that they're the King of England and you go and tell them that they're not the King of England, they're going to tell you, well, of course, that's what you would say if I really was the King of England. You would tell me that I'm not, to try to, like it's everything like fits into that circle. And what Chesterton is saying is what you need is poetry. You need artistry. He calls it mysticism. He doesn't mean like ancient mysticism in like an older way. He's talking about mysticism in the sense of that this world is not all that there is. That sense of mystery and awe and wonder at what is not just enclosed in the material universe is important. And so I don't think he's talking specifically there about people who have all their systematic theology completely neatly tied up. But I think you're right to see an application there to say if basically you feel like you have confined God to a system completely, just totally confined to a system of theology, then you've got something other than God. Even those church fathers who were extraordinarily careful about the way that they talked about God and what they wanted to say about the Trinity and stuff, all the way back to Augustine and others, would say, if you think that this explanation or this understanding of the Trinity is you've like mastered your understanding of God, you've got an idol.
And to be clear, for both you, Trevin, and the listeners, we're big fans of theology and for good, hard, clear, biblical, showing your work thinking. But when you get to the point of just like the infinite God of the universe who is outside time and whose breath holds together existence, I've got him down, and I can't hear anything else about it. Like,
yeah, totally.
Yeah, especially like our camp has it figured out, and all these other Christian camps, that are also, thinking about God and walking with Jesus, like have nothing to talk to me about. It's like,
yeah, I think the church is so big, and vast, and that's one of the things that comes out in Chesterton's writing is that he's certainly wanting to make that point again and again, that there is, and that is one of the beautiful things about learning from and exploring other traditions outside of your own. I look at my own church tradition as my house, but there are other houses in the neighborhood that are great to go visit. Yeah. And there are definitely houses I would say are outside of Orthodoxy that are not going to last
100%.
forever.
Sure.
So those houses are going to crumble because eventually there's nothing there. But within the neighborhood, it's nice to visit other people and to see, well, they do things differently over there, or they're a little bit like this or that, and then figure out and kind of glean from that. And you go back to your own home with a renewed appreciation for your own tradition while learning something of others as well.
And Philip mentioned this earlier, like even Chesterton himself could be considered in that vein, right? As like earlier on in life, I remember maybe it was from a sermon from Piper or something. One of the main things I knew about Chesterton was that he was like an annihilationist or something. So it was like, oh yeah, this guy, who was super influential on C.S. Lewis, who was super influential on Piper's thought, like is got this kind of weird, kind of out there take on hell or something.
No, I think you're confusing him with George MacDonald.
Am I? Oh, you know what?
Yeah,
I am.
who was Universalist. Yeah,
okay,
I'm not sure, honestly, of anything specifics other than he did not end up in the Protestant camp. If I'm correct.
That's right. So
other than that, I don't think I ever heard of any specifics. Like, I don't think I ever heard Chesterton mentioned the first 25 plus years of my life without extreme caveats. So like I never had an overly positive view of him for quite a while.
Yeah, he started out, his parents were Unitarians, and he winds up going through a nihilistic phase that led him to that deep despair when he was in art school that I talked about. And then he winds up becoming Anglican. His wife is very devout Anglican. And then he converts to Catholicism in 1922. So the last 14 years of his life, he's Roman Catholic. And so Chesterton, but in this book in particular, which he wrote as an Anglican, he's really not writing about denominational distinctives so much as he's really just talking about the Christian outlook on the world.
Yeah, I think he's like life philosophy, I guess, was the buzzword at the time.
Yeah, which I guess is the precursor to like worldview kind of talking.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. As I'm hearing you guys, engage with the content of this book, it actually reminds me of an episode we did, episode 65 with Courtney Ellis. And there was a part that we had a conversation with her about Christian imagination. And it sounds like the author of Orthodoxy, he was able to actually tap into that without sacrificing, like we were talking about, the systematic theology. And I think, and you can say it's because of the culture today or whatever, but I think there is definitely an affinity towards polarization, even in our own life, regardless, even if you don't extend it out to like groups and camps and things like that. It's just like, I can only have one or the other. And so talk about the importance and kind of the beauty of a Christian being okay to have imagination, and not so much that you're imagining God to exist, because it's like he's real, he's actually real, he's not in your imagination. But to have imagination as a tool or vehicle to be able to really enjoy more of the beauties and truths of God.
Yeah, I think what makes Chesterton special here is that he really isn't a theologian. He would never have considered himself a theologian. And I read a lot of theology. I don't really go to Chesterton for his theology.
Mhm.
First and foremost, he would have said he's just a journalist. Well, what does a journalist do? A journalist observes the world and writes about things, comments on
Mhm.
cultural things.
Mhm.
But he also, the imagination you're talking about comes out in so much of his other work because he was a literary critic. He helped restore the reputation of Charles Dickens with a very famous work in 1905. He wrote plays. He wrote poetry, The Ballad of the White Horse, Lepanto. These are like poems that were set in the trenches in World War I that were very famous.
Mm.
He wrote fiction. He wrote detective stories, the Father Brown series.
Oh
That's him.
yeah.
Yeah. So
Those are going on the read list.
yeah, he wrote novels. So he's really what's so awesome about that sort of eclectic part of Chesterton is that he's not boxed in to just one thing, that this is what he does.
Mhm.
He's got this breadth of imagination in so many different areas, and then it all fits together. So
Yeah.
you get his philosophy in his fiction works, and you get stories and analogies that are mind-blowing in his apologetics works. Like, that's the beauty of kind of what he's bringing to the table. And I think we need more of that. I think we need more theologians who
Imagination.
love the arts and artists who love theology.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
We
Say
we
that.
need more of that, and we need them talking to each other. And maybe you may be more on one side of that than the other, but you're going to be enriched by having your imagination fueled by great art.
Yeah. No, I
Man,
love that.
I agree.
It kind of brings me back to something I was wondering about earlier, since you kind of talked about this, is as you go through and try to source and annotate all of these kind of obscure references, you get education along the way. And it's interesting you mentioned that, because that's literally the work you did, obviously, in doing this book. So I'm really curious about like some of the fun tidbits or like rabbit holes that you fell down while you were sourcing the work for this, reading up on all of these obscure events that he was mentioning, like some fun things that you learned like while you were on the journey of annotating orthodoxy.
Yeah, I definitely learned a lot about the about English history and geography more than I expected. Like, he's mentioning these places, and I'm like, okay, where is that? Wikipedia, help me here. Like, trying to find out. One of the things that there are little things that you just you read the book a bunch, and if you don't really know, you don't really know. But like the story the book opens with this example of, he tells a story about a man on a yacht
Mhm.
who sets out to find another land. He's like leaving England to go find India, basically.
Mhm.
And he winds up, as he arrives, and he thinks he's arriving in the South Seas. He winds up, and it says he lands
Right.
to plant the British flag on that, and it says, on that barbaric temple, which turned out to be the Pavilion at Brighton. So I'm like, okay, what is the Pavilion at Brighton? Well, I do some research to find out what exactly that is for the
Mhm.
reader. That is where it's a former royal residence in Brighton, England. 1784 is when it was built. It was a seaside retreat for George, the Prince of Wales, who became King George the Fourth.
Mhm.
And Chesterton probably chose that place because there's an Indo-Saracenic style. So it's got domes and minarets that would look like you're in a different country than England.
Yeah.
And yet
Wow.
you're not. So I was like, I had no idea. Like, I look up the pictures online. I look at this place, like, I'm like, oh, that's why he talks about Brighton, and that he plants the British flag basically on British territory, but it looks at the moment. So it's like
Mhm.
little things like that that really make the annotations, make the the picture come alive more than I even realized.
Yeah.
Having read the book multiple times, and I think that was there are just all sorts of little things like that in doing the study that were fun.
Yeah.
Nice. That's good.
So, when exactly was this book originally written?
This book came out in 1908.
Okay, now I thought it was
wow.
in the 1900s. I almost said this century. Nope, not anymore.
Interesting that it's pre-World War I and it's pre like Bolshevik revolution in Russia.
What do you think? I mean, personally, I've got through a little bit more than half of it, and I'm finding it to be an absolute delight. But what do you think are some of the lowest hanging fruit? Like how should we sell this to our friends? How should listeners try to rope some people into reading a book that was written by 1908 by a guy answering his contemporaries in the newspapers? Like, what do you think is some of the easiest way for us to kind of loop people into this?
Well, I'd say most of the contemporaries that he's mentioning, I have to put footnotes on because as famous as many of them were at the time, they're unknown today.
Mm-hmm.
And yet Orthodoxy's never been out of print. So you've got 100 and, what are we now, 114 years now of testimony basically that says, hey, this is a book that as much as it's directed to a lot of contemporary people at the time, it has really stood the test of time and people have gone back to it over and over again. So I would say that. I'd also say, I'll just give you this little nugget of this tidbit, okay? I don't know if you guys are familiar with the pastor John Piper and his reading style, but John Piper reads very slowly. He's not a fast reader. He doesn't read a lot of books. And because of that, he does not read a book. It rarely reads a book twice. Orthodoxy is one of the only books in his life that he says when he got to the very last page and finished the book, he turned the book over and opened it again and started completely from the beginning and immediately worked through it a second time.
Wow.
And so I'm like, okay, if John Piper thought this book, and I mean, the funny thing is John Piper is a Calvinist and Chesterton is like,
he
vehemently anti-Calvinist. Yeah. Like totally. But John Piper felt like this book was so worth reading again that it went right back and did it a second time. So I'm like, if that doesn't convince you that there's at least some value there, I don't know what will,
Yeah. Well, that's interesting.
That's high praise.
What I get from this is there's quite a value in apologetics, and I think at least my engagement with it has often been, apologetics, like that's so specific of a part of Christianity that you go ahead and go to seminary, get your training and all of that, and that is the environment in which you engage and learn about apologetics. But it sounds like this work is like, no, we can practice apologetics in such a natural way as we engage with each other as well as we engage with the world. So talk about that, just the value of apologetics.
Yeah, there's a hilarious paradox at the center of this conversation about Chesterton as an apologist, which is so fitting considering just how the sense of humor that Chesterton has. Chesterton never read Christian apologetics. He read all of Christianity's critics, and that's what convinced him Christianity was true. And so he writes a book that becomes a classic of apologetics. Like, how funny is that, right? Like, it's like so bizarre. This is there's another book that he wrote called The Everlasting Man, which C.S. Lewis says is the greatest apologetic in the English language. He says that to
making a note of that.
He says that in a letter at some point. But here's the big takeaway for me when I think of Chesterton as an apologist. And I think Philip, your answer is right here. I'm sorry, Vince. Vincent, your answer is right. Or your question is good because you're asking this question about how like the role apologetics is supposed to play in our lives. You don't really have Chesterton doing apologetics without friendships. if you know something about his life, you know he was dearly beloved by people who disagreed with him on almost everything.
What?
That's beautiful.
That's the man we need right now.
George Bernard Shaw and G.K. Chesterton are basically like two polar opposites, right?
He had some sharp words for him in this book.
Oh, yeah. And he basically says, I'm the only one who really can understand Bernard Shaw, and I disagree with him because I understand him. Like, they were extraordinarily close friends, and Chesterton was friends with lots of people that he was going after philosophically as much as possible, and then going to a pub to drink and to enjoy the friendship and the camaraderie. So there's something about his willingness to engage people with radically different worldviews. George Bernard Shaw and Chesterton, their differences even go to the way they look. I mean, Chesterton's over 6 feet tall. He's this massive individual, like barreling down the sidewalk, and George Bernard Shaw is this very thin, puritanical kind of man. Like he's not going to even eat, certain kinds of food, and like what, one time I think Chesterton said, to George, "Hey, the way you look, George, you'd think there was a famine in the land." And George's response was, "Well, the way you look, you'd think you caused it." They took digs at each other all the time, but they loved each other. And Chesterton was beloved by people who were radically different in worldview and philosophy. So that's my takeaway from him. It's that when he's doing apologetics or he's making a case for the Christian faith, he's making it in the context of deep, rich friendships with people he thinks are absolutely wrong on the fundamental principles of philosophy of human life.
Wow. Man, that almost seems like unimaginable today, because you see apologetics and it's defending the faith, and we about to go toe to toe with each other. And my first engagement into apologetics was public debates, and it was like, and I benefited from it, but it's just so unfriendly. And it can sometimes, especially if you're online, it can get vitriolic. It's just ripping each other apart, even other brothers or sisters in Christ. And it's like, I've done the research and I've done the study, and here's the history, and and almost like, just anathema somebody who just disagrees with you on a couple points. And so I think if we take that testimony to heart, I think we would probably be able to engage in apologetics in a way that's actually helpful and that can go leaps and bounds than what it does today.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. There's something that comes through in his writing, and I mean, he did public debates too. He just generally befriended a lot of the people he debated beforehand or afterwards. But one of the cool things about that is he's just very settled. Like it strikes me, especially coming from I come from a camp that tends to be more reformed in their theology, have a very high view of the sovereignty of God and whatnot, and I love that. I love that personally because I feel it helps me rest assured. Like the Orthodoxy doesn't depend on the American church. Orthodoxy doesn't depend on me convincing everybody that this is the right way. Orthodoxy is going to last the test of time. It's going to stand the
God
the
is
test
stronger
of time.
than us.
Yeah, and
truth doesn't need to be affirmed to be truth.
Yeah,
that's absolutely right. And there's something that is so joyful and settled in Chesterton's defense of the Christian faith, and that he doesn't argue like it all depends on him.
Yeah,
he argues like he's just marveling at the fact that he's been invited into this adventure. Like that's how it comes across.
I love the sense of
having fun rather than trying to be right.
Yeah,
which practically, not that you want to use this as a tactic, but what that does is it draws people in. Not like the dour, like pulpit banging, like here's my problem with everybody in the world, kind of like apologetics. Like you're not going to be like, oh, come follow me, come join my camp and be like me.
Yeah, after I literally flamed you, and then it's like, oh yeah, and I love you too. It's like, what?
Well, there's an apocryphal story that he actually wrote a book called "What's Wrong with the World," and so he would definitely flame people in a sense of like really going hard after arguments, but never in a personal, very rarely ever in a personal way. But there's that apocryphal story, and I don't know, it's never been tracked down if it's true or not, but everyone loves to tell it because it's so close to Chesterton's heart. There was a newspaper article written, and there was a question. The headline was, "What's wrong with the world?" And he wound up writing into the newspaper and says, "What is wrong with the world? Dear sirs, I am yours truly, G.K. Chesterton." like immediately seeing his own sort of bentness or brokenness and or his own contribution to what's wrong with the world. No one's been able to track down like exactly which editor received that or like what that was or if he actually did that. But it's so characteristic of the man's humility and modesty that it totally fits his character. That he would write a book called "What's Wrong with the World" and at the same time see himself as part of the problem, not just the one with all the answers.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
That's awesome.
I'm confident based on just how well this is presented and just all of the great reasons that people have to engage with this work that people will. So after they do and they finish it the second or third time, what would be your follow-up? Like what's the next? What's 201 for someone who just got into Chesterton under Orthodoxy?
Yeah, if you're coming into Chesterton through remember, this is a really big man, both physically and figuratively.
And literally.
If you're coming into Chesterton through the apologetics door, which again, there's lots of doors you could come to him from. I mean, you could come into him from the detective stories or from Father Brown or from the literary criticism or from his essays or whatever. If you're coming in to him through the apologetics door and you want a 2-point, like a 201, I would then go to The Everlasting Man, which is the book that Lewis talked about that was influential for him and that he thought was a great apologetic. That one is a more specifically Christian apologetic from beginning to end, more so than it's sort of a retelling of the history of the world and then leading to Jesus at the center in a really creative way. So if you want to read a book that would take you further, like if you come into the apologetics door of Orthodoxy, that would be the next step there. But you may want to just step out into the hall and survey the landscape and be like, hey, I mean, one of the guys at the Babylon Bee just did an essay, just did a whole book of intro to Chesterton essays, like some of his greatest essays. I think Chesterton's greatest hits or something like that. But it's like his essays are terrific. So there's essay collections that you could go for. You could read one of the novels.
I'm definitely going to get into some of that Father Brown. I watched the first couple of seasons of that, and it was fun.
The essays sound like fun to me.
This like Christian thinker did some like the what if this like country priest was Sherlock Holmes. Like that's kind of a fun premise.
Yeah, and what's cool about Father Brown is he recognizes that Father Brown has insight into the human mind, into the human heart because of how much he knows about sin by hearing confessions, by knowing people, by pastoring, and so he's able to solve these murders and things by observing the world as it is and knowing the depths of the human heart. And so that's really where I think Father Brown it really shines as a detective series for sure.
Yeah. If nobody else that is listening is convinced, I'm definitely convinced. I got at least 2 books from Chesterton that I definitely am putting on the list.
And my job here is done.
And honestly, this is up there with it's when you just read a book for the first time, like recency bias is really a thing. But I mean, like this is definitely a top 10 and could be like a top 5 all time. Come back to it a whole lot kind of books for me.
Well, and Phil, like I used to have like tons and tons of books and too many bookshelves, and after moving in,
Trevor hates paper.
I really I digitize a lot of stuff, but actually I do like to read a physical book. These are my confessions, but I just don't like. I don't have a lot of space on my shelf for like a ton of books that like aren't important to me.
Sure.
And so like I have things culled down a lot, and just getting into this and seeing how this person thinks and like his imagination, to me, like that's something that is super valuable and definitely worth putting on the shelf, even when
it's a really thin book.
Yes,
too. You notice that,
nice.
Trevor?
So
it's like,
nice.
It's like taller than usual, and it's really thin, so it won't take up too much room on the shelf.
And it also just looks smart. It just says orthodoxy. Like if nobody knows what that is, they'll be like, "Oh, like."
Right.
But it's a good conversation piece. For sure.
Your IQ, the people's perception of your IQ immediately goes up when they see it.
Yeah, 10 points.
All right, so Trevin, like we said earlier, the only segment we do on the show here is substance shoutouts, where we like to give you a second here to talk about things you've been reading, watching, listening to, books, films, podcasts, articles, music. Jamar Tisby once shouted out a mobile game. So I mean, like whatever. Cool. Well, what has been bringing you joy, or what have you been finding delight or edification in lately? And it can be a few things if you like.
Yeah, I mean, I've been watching Moon Knight with my teenage kids, the new Marvel show, and we're about to go watch it when we finish this recording. So they're not streaming it now, just so we won't have Wi-Fi problems, but they're waiting patiently to watch the new episode. So Moon Knight's been a blast. I've been I you had Karen Pryor on here. She just recently had Tess of the D'Urbervilles, a Thomas Hardy book, come out. I'd never even read any Thomas Hardy, didn't read that book, didn't know anything. And I asked people, hey, between these couple of books that were out, Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne and this one, which one should I read? And a lot of people said Tess, and it's like really long. But I got into it, and man, it was a really riveting read. It's one of the better classics that I've read in a long time. Wow. So
I'm very excited to read that one.
Same.
Yeah, it's well, let me just say it is a tragedy, so just be ready.
Oh, no, like I got it on my shelf upstairs. I don't think I've ever read any Hardy long form. Like I'm aware of a lot of the classics.
Hardy boys.
I've never read it. Some of the I was about to reread the Scarlet Letter because B&H just sent us both of them. I got them on my shelf upstairs, and I was like, okay, I'm familiar with the Scarlet Letter. I'm going to reread it. But the footnote that has been going viral on social media the last couple weeks about the Hardy's burial, I was just like, well, that alone made me wanna.
That was crazy. That was crazy.
So for listeners, you want to tell that story?
Yeah. No, you probably came across it more recently than I did, but that shocked me, and it was really disturbing. Actually,
this sounds like it's straight out of like an HBO like hardcore drama. I may be getting some of the details wrong, but basically, when they went to go bury him, they like had his organs out, stuff like that. Oh. And when I don't know who you want to call it, coroner or whatever, when the guy he went out to lunch and he came back and he was preparing the body, and his cat had eaten Thomas Hardy's heart, and because he was like such an important guy, they like killed the cat to get the heart so that they could like bury him whole because he was such an important guy.
But didn't they bury like a part of him was it Westminster Abbey or
they where could have? I'm certainly not a scholar, but that alone I was like, whoa, yes. That's gnarly.
Yeah, I mean, just crazy. Ridiculous. I was just, it sounded like something out of an Edgar Allan Poe.
For real.
Kind of story. But yeah.
Well, excellent. Wow. Trev, you want to do what's next, actually?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I just finished up a book that I sent off to IVP. They're publishing a book, The Thrill of Orthodoxy, Rediscovering the Adventure of Christian Faith. It comes out in November of this year, 2022, and it is, it's not really a book about Chesterton's orthodoxy. It's about Christian doctrine, Christian theology, and the first sentence of the book is that the church faces her biggest challenge not when new errors start to win, but when old truths no longer wow. And so the point I want to make in that book is that we sometimes familiarity is the enemy of wonder. And if we lose our wonder at the beauty and the goodness of Christian truth, we could be on the road to drifting into error or perhaps heresy without even knowing it. So yeah, really exciting resource that I can't wait for people to get into it. And it's got a lot of Chestertonian feels in it. So if you like this conversation, I think you'll like the book, but it's for today's audience and it's a little more focused on Christian theology.
Has the cover been finalized and revealed yet?
It has.
All right, I need to go look that up when we're done here. Well, hey, November, that's down the road here. We got to have you back then. That sounds excellent.
That would be fun.
Awesome.
Well, Trevin, if people want to get in contact with you, they want to follow you, see everything that you're doing, how can they get in contact with you online?
Yeah, the easiest way is probably just to go to my website. It's trevinwax.com. It'll take you to my column at the Gospel Coalition. I'm also on Twitter, just at Trevin Wax. I'm on Facebook at Trevin Wax. I've got one of those names that's, I don't have to have like even underscores and stuff. It's just if you Google Trevin Wax, you're going to come across some stuff because there's not another one. So that's good for me.
Yeah, that works.
Cool.
Well, Trevin, thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your work here on with Chesterton, introducing it to folks, and we're excited to have people engage with this more as they have their minds kind of blown by the wonder and imagination in this work that you've made very accessible in this edition. So thank you for your time with us today.
Well, thanks for having me on. It's been a delight to talk with you guys.
And I look forward to the Thrill of Orthodoxy.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll make sure we hook you up.
Awesome. All right. Have a great night and enjoy watching some shows with the kids. Yeah, tell them thanks for waiting up for us.
I will. Will do.
Thanks.
All right. Have a good night.
All right. You too. See you.
Wanted to let you guys know off the top here, don't stop the podcast. We have a special announcement for you. For those of you who skip the end of the show here, The Substance, we're very proud to have hit 100 episodes. And here on episode 101, we wanted to announce that for now, at least for the foreseeable future, we'll be shifting to a bi-weekly format going forward here for a little while. But we want to continue to bring you The Substance. We want to make sure that we have enough time to put in research and effort and also produce a high quality podcast. I really think that we put a lot into it as far as the sound goes and the marketing and all that. So I think we want to slow down a little bit so that we can make sure that we are putting in all the substance we can to this. So for now, we are switching to a bi-weekly format. So episode 102 will be coming out in 2 weeks. It'll be every other week going forward.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that was Trevin Wax of the Gospel Coalition. He's done a lot with them. He is currently, as Philip said, researching at the North American Missions Board, which is the missions agency arm of the Southern Baptist Convention.
Writing books like crazy.
Writing books, coming on podcasts.
Yeah, we were his second podcast. He put in some great effort from working all day and this being his second podcast interview.
For real.
Yeah, that's hustle. That's hustle for real.
So reward that by jumping on G.K. Chesterton's Orthodoxy and
hitting our anchor link. So as you guys know, if you've been longtime listeners, we don't do Patreon proper. Our version of that is Anchor, which is where we host this show.
It's way more proper.
In the show notes there, you can click the Anchor link to sign up at the $1, $5, or $10 a month. This is also on the substancepod.com on the support section. And you can pick whatever works for you. We've got people supporting at a number of different levels, not loads and loads. So every little bit counts. If you like the Substance, we got a back catalog of at or over 100 episodes at this point. It's something that we love putting out to you for free. We're committed to doing that. But if you're able to support, that's always helpful. And if monthly regular support is just not your jam, we have Cash App, kind of like our digital tip jar every now and then. If you want to throw us $5, $10, $20, whatever, that is at $the Substance Pod.
Visit us at thesubstancepod.com. Do you guys like the shout outs that we have, especially the music? Then you can go to thesubstancepod.com and go to Bless Your Playlist, the Blessed playlist. And you can listen to episodes of different podcasts that we've enjoyed, or you can listen to songs that we've enjoyed or that we've shouted out or that we just like. Be warned, there is a splish splash of curse words in some of the songs.
I need the word splish splash to appear somewhere on that webpage too. By the way,
I might do that.
We just splish splash morning on there.
So definitely
one of those songs, Vince, is a straight up like get down song that I was not expecting when I went and listened to it. So
yeah, so
the original
what's nice about Spotify is it does have like a little E on the song for explicit. So just keep your eyes out for that. And if that's not something you want to enjoy, please just go to the next thing that doesn't have it. And definitely listen to our episodes on our episodes page. Leave us a comment under each episode. Tell us what you thought. And our socials are in the upper right corner of the homepage. So engage with us on thesubstancepod.com.
Substancepod.com.
Another thing you might have in your possession is a telephone. And if you have
you're probably listening to this on your telephone right now, odds are.
Yeah.
Most likely.
But like through the internet, you didn't like call in to like, that would be weird. I don't know how that would work.
To call. We should do that. We should have like a level, like if somebody supports us at like $100 a month, they can call in. They can get the Zencaster link to just listen live as we do it.
Call it. Yeah. Call in at this number.
Just don't unmute.
Yeah. And you know, nights and weekends, minutes supply. Anyway, it is 2022, the year of the voicemail, which is why we're talking about telephones, because you can use yours to call ours at 913-703-3883. You can say a little blurb about you, where you're from, what you think about the show, testimonials.
If this episode
thoughts.
caused you to pick up Orthodoxy, leave us a voicemail and tell us what you thought.
We definitely want to hear from you. You can also find all of our written communication info on our website, thesubstancepod.com. Go over there, fill out a little contact form, and you can talk to us that way if you're a little more skittish away from the voicemail. Those are the words that I have for this podcast.
There you go.
And so this is me, your host, Trevor.
And I'm Philip.
And I'm Vincent.
Saying so long. We'll see you again on another episode
of The Substance.
We gone.